Hello, colleagues, and welcome to Trust Leaders in the Loop, the second monthly podcast from Forum Strategy. I'm pleased that our first podcast was not a major disaster, and we've been asked to provide another one. And hopefully we'll get more proficient as the months roll by. As this is the last podcast in 2021, we'll be looking back over a few important events, but also looking forward, using our crystal bowls to try and give an indication of some emerging issues senior leaders may have to face in the new year in 2022. By way of introduction, my name is Frank Norris. I was the former CEO of the Co-op Academies Trust and quite a senior HMI working in framework development in Ofsted for nearly 11 years. I'm currently advising the Northern Powers Partnership on education and skills through a secondment from the Co-op Group. And I've been asked to chair these monthly chats along with Sarah Gins, the Forum Strategy's research manager. Sarah's been with Forum Strategy for nearly 7 years and was a policy manager at the National College for over 11 years. So hopefully with sufficient experience to provide some meaningful insight, which we hope will be of benefit to our members. So, hello, Sarah. Looks like Michael was sufficiently interested in our first effort. And we've got, have you had a chance to reflect on that first episode?
Yes, Frank, I think it went quite well, didn't it? I think it flowed nicely and we covered quite a lot of really key topics in quite a short space of time. So hopefully colleagues found that helpful and interesting and a kind of more sort of accessible, easy, digestible way of getting to grips with some of the key issues.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. I mean, I tend to sort of rabbit on a little bit, so I hope that it didn't meander too much. But I think we've had some reasonable feedback, so I think that's a good sign. And obviously, we're keen to try and improve them as every episode goes along. But it might be worth reminding everyone of the ground rules we agreed last time. I think the first one was to try and be forward-thinking and positive in our outlook.
Yes, Frank, and I think we also said that we want to acknowledge each time that everyone's experiencing significant challenges, ongoing challenges, particularly at the moment, as we run up to the Christmas break, and we won't be critical of any group, individual or minister during these sessions.
Yeah, and also, of course, I mean, the key thing is trying to be topical and explain things in a clear and concise way. So, and as I said before, that's a big challenge for me, Sarah. So hopefully I'll rein myself in a little bit. But anyway, have you any more that you've thought about in response to our first one?
No, I don't think so, Frank. I think that what you've just mentioned about keeping things concise is also a challenge for me. So we'll work on it together.
All right. Well, that's great. Okay. Well, do you want to kick off this week and get things moving?
Yes, thanks, Frank. So each podcast, if colleagues joined us last time, we aim to cover around half a dozen sort of topical issues. We try and use half of those to look back at important things that have arisen during the weekly briefings. So we scour the latest information, research, policy, etc., and guidance from sort of the education world. And then we'll sort of For this one, we're going to look back at the autumn term. It's been a long and challenging term, I'm sure everyone will agree. And it's not over yet, unfortunately. But we want to sort of pick out sort of three key issues for you to think about. And then look ahead at three things that are probably going to be on your plate and things to think about over the next few months. We hope you will find this chat helpful. And as always, we're keen to hear your views on how we can make them even more useful as we move forward into the next year.
Yeah, so I think the first one, I was keen for us to sort of pick up on the importance of autonomy for multi-academy trusts. And I know that this was a major theme, wasn't it, at the annual conference?
Yes, Frank, it was. And I think, you were there in the 2019 conference, where the theme was very much sort of CEOs and academy trusts at the heart of their communities and driving the change those communities wish to see. And that was picked up again, really, this year. A major theme was the need for trusts to look outwards rather than upwards. It's not enough to simply tread the same path. There are lots of changes afoot, and sort of we've kind of said we've tried to kind of use the phrase at Forum pure accountability, which means, from our perspective, academy trusts looking to those they serve, the pupils, the staff, the families, the communities, for their accountabilities, rather than just looking at what does the DFE want us to do? What is Ofsted looking for if we might get a summary evaluation, for example? We want them to be accountable to those that they serve. And Michael Payne stressed this in particular during the conference, and he keeps coming back to this issue. But one of the things that Michael did reflect on was that very often academy trusts aren't really probably making the most of the freedoms that they do and the autonomy that they do have under the Act, under the Academies Act. In fact, I think, Frank, that you'd realised that sort of Michael had said one or two really key things.
I think for me it was around there was a quote I seem to recall that he said that there was a once sort of cherished notion of giving the profession more freedom and autonomy, and that communities would have a greater role in the local accountability. But I think we've seen a sort of desire over, not just in the last year during the pandemic, but prior to that, and in other areas, not just related to COVID, a sort of the government trying to find sort of national solutions, which are sort of not quite in keeping with those sort of principles about what academisation was meant to be. And I think that sort of caused some sort of tension. I think it's a confusing place really, in terms of who is your master or mistress in this area. So I think it is important that CEOs go back to those first principles. And actually, at the end of the day, I know that there's, particularly in the pandemic, there's a requirement for there to be sort of national guidance, but the implementation of these things has been highlighted that all of this needs to be undertaken at a local level. And this can roll out into loads of other things around, curriculum design and stuff like that. So I think that this really, for me, Michael's sort of regular return to this issue is one that I think CEOs need to sort of reflect on, certainly now with, say, a few weeks, hopefully over the Christmas period, where there's a time for personal reflection to think about, well, perhaps we do need to push out and push up, and actually, do what's right for our communities and for our school. And at times that means, perhaps challenging the status quo a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely, Frank. And I think we've always had a situation throughout the education, it's probably the same in other sectors as well, that the most experienced and confident leaders they do feel that they have, they do have the confidence to take those steps, to take those measures, not to necessarily sort of look at the guidance and panic and think, actually, how do we make this work? It's more a case of, okay, well, this is what you've asked us to do, and this is how we're going to make it fit for our children and young people. So I think it's going to be the same. It's the same again, really, isn't it? That yes. Just having that confidence and experience. And I think this is where the value of the networks, such as the Forum Strategies Trust Leaders Network, comes into play, and the power of collaboration as well, so that you're sharing experiences, you're sharing instances of difficulties in getting to grips with certain things, and that's always going to be somebody you can reach out to say, actually, I've got this issue, I've got this problem, I'm not quite sure how to handle this bit. whether it's COVID related or much more broadly than that. And there's going to be someone there that can pick up the phone to you or drop you an email or whatever and say, actually, yeah, we've been through that. It was a bit weird, wasn't it? But actually, this is how we handled it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's funny because I've spoken to a number of the members at some of these breakfast briefings, and afterwards, people have said to me, "Well, I thought you were sort of where I've revealed sort of weaknesses or sort of lack of confidence or lack of certainty in decision making." And colleagues, a number of colleagues, would come to me afterwards and say, "Well, I didn't expect you to be like that," and actually, I think every CEO, every senior leader, is riddled with this self-doubt, and you worry whether or not the magic or the power or the influence you have will sort of like disappear at the click of the finger. I mean, in a way, there is an absolute need for everybody to sort of share that level of uncertainty that I think senior leaders have, so that it can reassure all of us as we go through that period of uncertainty about, well, where do we go? And I think personally, that I always found the trust board governing bodies really helpful. A good relationship at that level with those colleagues, where you can reveal your inner feelings, the uncertainty that you're facing, I think is critically important. So that's not just the colleagues within the forum strategy. That's a really powerful thing and necessary, and perhaps you'll say more to them than you might to others. But actually having a similarly open approach with trust boards is also important as well, I think.
I agree, Frank, and I just think that actually for me, the sign of a confident leader is one who's prepared to share their vulnerabilities.
Yes, yeah. Even though it may be hard to do, actually,
exactly.
You just got to grab the moment. I mean, I think another thing really that looking back was, I have to say I could perhaps reveal a sort of I don't know if it's a surprise. I wasn't shocked, but actually I did apply to join the Children's Commissioner, so her board, and do you know what? I was unsuccessful. Shock horror. I mean, in a way, that sort of thing sort of does affect you. Not affects your confidence. But you try to work out, well, why? What was the reason behind it? But actually, it's best not to and just move on. But the reason why I wanted to get involved with the Children's Commissioners Board is because I wanted to try and support the continuing work that the former Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield, undertook. And I was delighted when the new Commissioner made a really important piece of research, one of the key pillars of her first year, where she actually created a survey for children and young people to gather their views on growing up in England. So it's called The Big Ask. And if you haven't seen it, it's a very easy thing to review. So just search For Big Ask, and it's not a lengthy document, so it's nicely summarized. But it had over 500,000 responses. And so, if you haven't looked at that, I would urge you to go and have a look at it. But for me, it's really about where is the voice of the pupil and the student in all of this? And it made me think also that big ask about, how good are we as trust leaders, or how good was I at actually really getting down to what does it feel like to be a child in our trust? And I think that's some of that work that the new Children's Commission has undertaken has been really quite powerful. And I know it's I know she was on the Andrew Marr show on Sunday, with these awful events concerning that child who was murdered by the parents. But actually the issue here is trying to make sure that we do always reflect back on not just what it feels like to be the CEO or even the head teacher or principal of a school, but actually doing that sort of getting down to what does the day-to-day experience be, what's that like for children and young people. So it made me think, though, about how extensive are the surveys that I used to undertake, and did we do everything that we could to ensure that they were as confidential as they could be, because there's obviously risks around this. I appreciate that, but actually I think it's a really important point to reflect on.
I agree, Frank, and I think that there has been some recent commentary on research that's shown that children in the most outstanding schools tend to have the poorest level of well-being. And it can't be a coincidence in terms of the pressures. And this is, again, something that Michael has come back to many times over recent years. The Children's Society's Good Childhood Report and the index that they produce each year that shows sort of children's well-being and general overall life satisfaction. And it's consistently the case that school is a great source of anxiety for them and a great source of stress. And it's not just because of bullying, it's because of the expectations placed on them, cascading down probably from, or most likely from a system that puts all that pressure on teachers and leaders to get those results. And it's, it comes as no surprise. But these are a generation that are desperate to be heard. We heard that from Syed Acher, MBE, who spoke at our conference in September, and indeed he spoke at the one that you were at in 2019, Frank. And he was about 3 weeks away at that point from ending his term as a social mobility commissioner. And so he was passionate about sort of spreading those messages about this ongoing battle for children and young people. And he commented that they don't want to be, this generation of children and young people in our schools at the moment, they don't want to be defined as the COVID generation. No. So many in the media are defining them. They've got aspirations and hopes beyond that, way beyond that. But they're also a little worried, to put it mildly, about the future that awaits them. But they're desperate to have their voices heard. And these are that kind of just really emphasises, Frank, what you were talking about, wasn't it? That actually if trusts are going to do the best for children and young people right across all their schools, in particular the most disadvantaged, who often have the smallest voices, then this is, they have to be asked. They have to be asked, and they have to be allowed to give their honest answers, and not to be, put at a disadvantage from, for saying what they feel about things, and being confident to be heard.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting that that pressure that without realizing a CEO can exert. I'm sure no CEO is wanting to sort of have a negative impact in that way, but actually just whatever the key performance indicators or what it is that you actually discuss with your trustees, that discussion needs to involve, what do the people who are receiving the service or those people that work for us, how do they view our trust? And so in a way, it's critically important, I think, that, that CEOs reflect on the validity, the rigor, the strength of that evidence that they're giving to their trustees. Because, and actually, surely that's something that, the views of the people who work for us and the views of the people who receive the service, though in any other setting, in any other business, those would be critically important areas, and so, there's very few retailers that aren't concerned about what did the shopping experience feel like? Did they get what they wanted? How does it all feel? So I think that I think there is time for us to just think about, how strongly have we positioned those views in terms of how successful we are, and how do the board view that? So, I mean, it's good to have this sort of like 3 or 4 week period where perhaps, I know time, this Christmas break is always difficult because you think you're going to be able to do a lot more in it, but actually it's filled up often with stuff that you can't do any work in, so before too long you find yourself back in. But it is important, I think, that CEO or trust leaders get a chance to reflect on that, or we'll just be into the same pattern as we've always been into. One of the things that I was reflecting on, how amazing trust leaders have been, during the last, not the last term, whatever, but just the whole period of the last year, and it's been, an amazing period where, we've still got these, increasing COVID rates. We have this new variant coming, and actually the way that trusts have managed to keep things moving along, despite many staff being absent, many pupils being absent, due to COVID. So, I think that my discussions that I've had with trust leaders, it's clear that they've always tried to remain focused on looking forward and getting on with the job. But I've also been struck by their ingenuity, flexibility, their innovation. This has been an amazing period of free thinking, of thinking on your feet, doing what's best for the community, for the school or the trust that you serve. And despite what's been thrown at them, they've continued to find approaches that appear to work. At times they've not always worked as well as they would have liked, but those trust leaders have dusted themselves down, tried again, made tweaks here and there, or even actually abandoned stuff because actually they've come across or they've heard of a new approach, or another trust leader has convinced them of a change. So it is quite staggering, and I think it's deeply impressive about how professional the profession has been during this time.
Yeah, absolutely, Frank. I think that it's been really clear that teachers and leaders of head teachers have always been amongst the most trusted professions in the polling that organisations such as Ipsos Mori do. Teachers and school leaders are always among the most trusted. That's always been the case. But I think that this period has really shown the wider society what we've always known, which is that actually the phenomenal work that teachers and leaders do every day, and has also set, amongst a sort of a historic, not too long ago, historic, almost constant sort of weekly clamorings in the edu-press about the failings of certain multi-academy trusts or others. And it's really, this period of time, I think, is really, they're always going to exist, but I think it's really set academy trusts themselves in a new light in the public's eye. And also for those schools who perhaps were more reticent to join in a multi-academy trust, they've had a hand reached out to them in many cases, free from tie-in, free from commitment, just to say, actually, can we help? And that has been absolutely invaluable. I do seem to recall a report published a bit earlier this term from Challenge Partners that pulled out some really interesting headline themes about challenges that schools have faced during the pandemic. And I think there's a real range of those, and sort of supporting the disadvantaged children, use of ed tech, novel communication approaches with an engagement with parents and carers.
I have to say, I think I'm really struck by that on the comms side of it, the way that the regular use of Zoom as a vehicle, has enabled, trust leaders to just put themselves in front of the camera and actually try and communicate in a different sort of way. And I think that's been I hope that trust leaders look further to how they can develop that even more, so they can feel as though they're reaching out and speaking directly to people, rather than it all being through written stuff or being put on a website somewhere. I think that's a real important development, I think. But I think also there's been this sort of increased focus, isn't there, on well-being right across the board, and I'm convinced that won't die. I think that's now sort of ingrained, and I think that will be stuff that will continue to be addressed by trust leaders going forward. But also, one of the points, Sarah, it was also, I remember it being about revisiting behaviour strategies, as in order to the changes and the experiences that young people are having as they were sort of in school, out of school, whatever, the technology also has enabled schools to begin to address some of those needs in a slightly different way, so I think it's been an amazing period of development, and I hope that some of that will embed itself, because I think there is some really good stuff in there. It's about not getting back to where we were before, but learning from where we are, what we experienced and moving forward.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's move forward now. I noticed there's the Forum Strategy did some work with the National Governors Association, didn't they, about CEO job description. So do you want to sort of give us a little insight into all of that work?
Yeah, it's really important. We just thought it was really important to try and have a framework which CEOs, Academy Trusts and Board of Trustees could have as a kind of almost an aide memoir, really. What does this still relatively new and slightly odd role of CEO of an Academy Trust look like? It's only really existed for 10, 11 years. It's very much been, its evolution has very much been driven by trust boards and CEOs themselves. There wasn't anything there that could be kind of sort of reflected on. And obviously, Michael Payne, our Forum Trust CEO, produced a couple of years ago, his Being the CEO book, within which was a framework which our Being the CEO programme for aspiring Academy Trust CEOs is based on. And so this job description was very much based on that framework, which is sort of like a tried and tested, with aspiring leaders who then, most often moved on to be successful, applied for and been successful CEOs. So I think it's likely to be a document that's going to be used more frequently going forward. We just think there has been a lot of variation because of the way that it's evolved. It's evolved sort of very organically without really any guidance at all.
I do performance reviews of some CEOs, and it's quite interesting. You want variability. To be honest, you do need a level of flexibility about this because obviously these roles are serving different communities in different times and whatever. But it is quite interesting how fundamentally different some of them are. So I really hope that that this does take hold, because I think that would allow us then to get within a sort of broad framework, allow us to sort of have clarity about what that sort of role actually involves. But actually is, there's a big difference between being the CEO and being a head teacher, isn't there? Or even, an exec head. I mean, this is a very different sort of beast, and at times it's always felt a little bit uncertain about where the lines are on that. So hopefully that will go some way to helping that.
Absolutely. And it's not intended to be prescriptive. It's intended to kind of create a foundation, a foundation framework upon which to sort of build the core elements of the role, within which there are clearly nuanced elements depending on your context, as there always have been and always will be with school and trust leadership.
Yeah, I mean, just if we move on to another point, I think I've mentioned this a few times when I've spoke to colleagues at the Forum Strategy about the future risks that there are looking forward about. Where are the future CEOs? Where are the future school leaders? Where are the future heads of department? Where are they all coming from? And in a way, I think this has enabled me to think that perhaps we need to look much more broadly at the skill set that our staff have, and to see whether or not we've got actually, we're always looking for the very best. Obviously, you've got to look for the best teacher, best head of department, best head. But actually, there are people within our trust whose skill set could be in another area. And at times we need to make sure that we're always looking at the individual's professional career, not just in terms of can I make you a better teacher or better head of department, but actually looking at what other roles are there that are needed in the trust going forward. Because I think we could find ourselves just with this potential recruitment crisis that's coming, which will start with not enough teachers joining the profession. But actually, we've got to be thinking much more broadly about how we can keep the staff that we've trained and committed to, and what can we do to actually enable them to grow and develop. and it might be in a slightly different role to the one that they've got, rather than just hammering the same nail time and time again. We've got to think much more broadly about that. And I think that's where we're likely then to get, another batch of ambitious CEOs coming through, not through the same route, but through a variety of routes coming to that position.
Yeah, absolutely, Frank. And I think we always need to be a bit careful about when you said sort of who are the best. How do we define the best? Yeah. We're generally speaking quite narrow, I think, in how we're thinking about the best, and oftentimes it comes down to academic credentials, qualifications, and less about some of the perhaps softer leadership skills that people who are perhaps unexpected may exhibit very, very strongly, but it's not necessarily recognised. So I agree with your point about, let's get better at recognising and nurturing those individuals who may well have a key role in and be able to step up.
Yes. So I think it's about going forward and making sure that every single member of staff, we consider what skills and attributes and talents they have and what potential they have for further growth, and to think more broadly about where that journey might be heading, So I think it's about, because what's in my mind is I do know of I'm sure CEOs will give similar stories of people who you find yourself in a position where you've got a vacancy, you need to fill it very quickly, and there's somebody within the trust who you thought, I'm not quite sure that's the right person, but actually with some growth and development and support, they've suddenly blossomed. So for me, it's all around just making sure that we're not pushing people into dead ends, and that actually they see that their career can grow and develop, in slightly different ways as they move forward. I mean, it's interesting what's coming up ahead in the next few months for Forum Strategy, I suppose, is the final point, I suppose. Are there any things that are worthy of sort of highlighting to colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, Frank. I think that obviously we've got a few network events planned for the next term, for the spring term. I would advise colleagues to look ahead next year. At the start of the year, we'll be putting out more detail on those. We also have we're very excited about this, our symposium, our National Trust Leaders Symposium on the 8th of June next year, which is going to bring together members of our CEO, COO and education executive networks. And that's going to be with Sir Michael Barber and facilitated by Forum.
Is that the first time you've done this?
It is the first time we've done this. We're very excited about it. It's going to be planned to be a real day of sort of active engagement, of reflection, and sort of really, hopefully, great engagement, sort of based on Sir Michael's book, Accomplishment. He's going to draw out the key themes from that. And we think it'll be really exciting. It's great that Sir Michael's going to agree to do that with us. But so if I would just advise colleagues, particularly in terms of next term's networks, just to stay up to date with us at forumstrategy.org. We've got always put our latest articles on there. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at Forum Strategy UK. Brilliant.
Okay, well, believe it or not, that's where nearly 35 minutes of our day goes, Sarah. That went so quickly. It's amazing. It's time to wrap up the podcast now. I've really enjoyed it. And those who are listening, if you've enjoyed it as well, then please let Sarah and myself know. We're keen to hear from you as to how we can make these discussions better. And I think a really important point, if there are any particular topics that you'd like Sarah and I to chat about, please contact Forum Strategy through the usual routes, and we'll review those, and more than happy to have a members issue discussion if there are any. But anyway, it just leaves me now to say Happy Christmas, Sarah.
And Happy Christmas to you too, Frank. Yeah, thanks very much.
I hope you have a great festive break. And to everybody, until 2022, have an enjoyable break. do your best to try and get some relaxation. Think about the future, and let's hope for I don't think it's going to be a normal 2022, but I'm sure with the skill and expertise that we've got in our trusts that we'll get through it together. But anyway, it's goodbye from us. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.